This video was brought to you by Brilliant. At roughly 2 AM on Tuesday, the Nova Kakhovka Dam was destroyed. Millions of cubic meters of water flooded down the Dnipro over the day, sweeping away entire towns and sparking a furious blame game between Kyiv and the Kremlin. So in this video, we're going to have a look at what happened on Tuesday, why it was almost definitely Russia, not Ukraine, and why this could end up being one of Russia's worst strategic blunders in the war so far. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start by explaining why this was almost definitely the Russians and not the Ukrainians. From what we've seen, the Kremlin and pro-Russian commentators who blame Ukraine for blowing up Nova Kakhovka claim that Ukraine blew up the dam to damage Russia's defensive fortifications on the left side of the Dnipro and cut off water supplies to Crimea, which relies on the Nova Kakhovka reservoir for 80% of its fresh water. They also point out that Ukraine considered blowing up the dam at the end of last year. When Russia withdrew from Kherson city and the right bank of the Dnipro River in November, their new general, Sergei Surovikin, claimed that it was because the Ukrainians were threatening to blow up the Nova Kakhovka Dam and drown the thousands of Russian troops occupying Kherson city. While Ukraine denied the allegations at the time, Major General Andriy Kovalchuk, who was the then commander of Ukraine's southern forces, told the Washington Post in December that Ukraine had considered striking the dam with HIMARS, but then decided against it. Unfortunately for the Kremlin, none of this really makes sense. For starters, even if the ensuing flood washes away some of the Russian defences, the area will be swamped for months, which makes a Ukrainian offensive in the south basically impossible until later this year. This is what the Ukrainian government thinks is going on. They've speculated that Russia blew the dam to prevent the Ukrainians from using islands in the middle of the Dnipro as bridgeheads for an amphibious assault into Kherson Oblast. Furthermore, while Ukraine might have considered striking the dam last year, A, they decided against it, and B, that was when Russian troops were occupying Kherson. Now that it's occupied by the Ukrainians, it makes absolutely no sense for Ukraine to blow up the dam. It would prevent a counteroffensive in the south and put Ukrainian troops in Kherson city at serious risk of drowning. In fact, since then, Zelensky has repeatedly claimed that Ukrainian intelligence had evidence that the Russians had mined the dam. Faced with this evidence, some pro-Russian commentators have instead suggested that this might be the result of wear and tear, pointing out that the dam had been struck by Ukrainian artillery in the past, and that satellite imagery suggests that there was damage to the dam in late May, which could have been exacerbated by the unusually high water levels in the reservoir at this time of year. But this theory is implausible for two reasons. First, the size of the fissure suggests that it was destroyed by some sort of explosive. Second, the timing is just too much of a coincidence. The Russians have occupied Nova Kakhovka since basically the beginning of the war. What are the chances that the dam finally gives way on day 2 of Ukraine's much-anticipated counteroffensive? Furthermore, there's an abundance of circumstantial evidence for implying Russian culpability. For starters, the Russian parliament passed a suspiciously timed law last month removing the need for investigations at disasters on occupied territories, like this one, and the break in the dam is on the Russian side of the river. It's also worth noting that Russia has form here. In mid-September, Russian cruise missiles blew up the dam near the town of Kryvyi Rih, causing extensive flooding. Perhaps most damning is the fact that Russian soldiers have been talking about this on Russian Telegram channels since at least December. And when it happened, a Russian soldier from Kherson explicitly admitted that Russia had blown up the dam and called for Russia to blow up other dams along the Dnipro. A similar thing happened with MH17. Russian soldiers originally bragged about shooting it down, but when the international backlash became apparent, the Kremlin told them to shut up and pretend it never happened. Now, it's possible that Russia never intended to do as much damage as they did. It might be that Russia was trying to create a small hole in the dam to temporarily flood the island in the Dnipro near Kherson, which Ukraine captured on Monday as part of an amphibious probe in Kherson. This would have been ideal from a Russian point of view. It would have prevented a Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kherson, while protecting the water supply to Crimea and providing Russia with plausible deniability. It would also be consistent with comments made by the Russian-installed head of Kherson Oblast, who originally claimed that nothing had happened and then claimed that there was only a small hole in the dam. Either way, this was clearly Russia's doing, and either way, it looks like a real strategic risk. While it might stem a Ukrainian counteroffensive in the south, it could really upset not just the West, but the international community. It's probably a violation of the Geneva Convention, which specifically prohibits attacks on dams as part of Article 56 of the additional protocol, and it risks a nuclear disaster at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which has been occupied by Russian forces for more than a year. The Zaporizhzhia NPP sits well upstream of the dam, but it relies on the reservoir for cooling water. While there's little immediate risk, largely because the power plant has its own mini reservoir which has water to last a few weeks at least, the world won't be happy that the Russians are apparently playing fast and loose with nuclear safety. We're not just talking about the West here either. For example, nuclear safety is something that the Chinese have been particularly focused on. Point 7 of their 12-point peace plan for Ukraine specifically insists that both sides do their best to keep nuclear power plants safe. At the time, this looked like a thinly veiled snipe at Ukraine, whom Russia has previously accused of shelling the plant. But China's concerns about nuclear risks are genuine, and this won't go down well in Beijing, assuming they conclude that Russia is responsible. Finally, the other thing worth mentioning is that this implies that Russia is desperate. This attack on the Nova Kakhovka Dam suggests that the Kremlin have mostly given up on restraint and are now trying everything to make their special military operation work. When making videos like this, we rely on a ton of data analysis to interpret military strategy and economic objectives. That kind of analysis isn't just crucial for our jobs. As our world becomes more driven by AI and data, your job will likely require more analytical skills too. Fortunately, you don't have to be left behind if you jump onto Brilliant. Brilliant is the STEM learning platform which can teach you all the skills you'll need in an increasingly digital workplace, from foundational and advanced maths to AI, data science, neural networks, and more. That means that the progression of tech and AI doesn't need to be intimidating. With easy-to-understand and interactive programs, you can level up your skills by spending just a few minutes a day on Brilliant. And you'll want to. Their programs have been directly built around the principles of active learning, so they're fun, interactive, and help you learn by doing. Plus, with new courses added all the time, there's no way you're getting left behind. To try everything Brilliant has to offer, free for a full 30 days, click on the link in the description. Plus, the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. As always, thanks to Brilliant, and thanks for your support.